Estamos viendo la riqueza de los alimentos, solo por Wobby.
The contention was that some cereals only offered empty calories because of the way they were made.
A whole grain starts off typically with 20 to 26 nutrients, essential nutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential fats. Processing itself damages nutrients. They might be heat sensitive, like the B vitamins, or you might be breaking down the cereal so much that you start the process of the cells structures breaking down.
The big manufacturers did have a partial answer to these criticisms. For decades, they had been spraying vitamins back onto their cereals.
What the company does is to fortify the grain with a range of vitamins and minerals. These are over and above the levels that would be seen in the natural grain. And there is, I think, quite a lot of evidence that breakfast cereals in the UK do make a very significant contribution to the micronutrient intake of the population.
Ready-to-eat cereals do contain sugar as an ingredient, but it delivers so much more, and you cannot determine the nutritional merit of a food based on one ingredient. You have to look at it in totality. And so when you're looking at ready-to-eat cereal or sweetened cereal, they deliver many essential nutrients, vitamins and minerals.
Very quickly, the cereal manufacturers realised that fortification, rather than being a kind of millstone around their neck, could become yet another marketing opportunity, and they could boast about how many of your daily vitamins you could get in the space of a day just from cereal.
Away from the debate in Washington, D.C., people were hungry for an alternative.
In the 1970s, there was a kind of backlash against cereals. You have all these kind of people rejecting the whole of the mainstream food culture. You have a sort of counterculture, you have a rise of vegetarianism, and you have a sort of rise of non-branded, non-packaged cereals, muesli sold through health food shops.
The younger generation sort of said, look, this modern foods, you know, it was the big companies producing stuff that they thought was not good. Conspiracy theory stuff. The big companies were, producing fake food.
Two very different homegrown family firms were beginning to see the financial potential of this counterculture, and particularly the food that fed it. Weetabix, the leading British cereal manufacturer, and the Jordan brothers. A couple of miller's lads from Bedfordshire, Bill and David, had just returned home after backpacking around the west coast of America. Their company would go on to become a British cereal success story with a turnover of £85 million. But back in 1970, they found trouble at mill.
There'd been 400 mills in Bedfordshire, and it wasn't that encouraging to us to see that all but one of them had all wrapped up and gone home. So we had to find something for the family business to do.
The brothers had noticed the burgeoning health food movement in California, and in particular, a crunchy whole grain cereal known as granola.
Bill and I were lucky to actually see a little bit of what went on and to recognise then that there was the opportunity of, emulating, copying a few of the best ideas, and at the time it seemed like, an opportunity to do something a little bit different.
I'd been actually trained as a flour miller, so I kind of had an understanding about how you made whole grain products, and it was just interesting to see how creatively it was sort of made and sold in California. So I suppose we both turned up back here sort of thinking, this really ought to happen.
They hit on the idea of making their own version.
We had a very small oven, a small batch oven. We used to have to sort of work it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and It was quite funny. We used to have mates of ours, we'd work the night shift, we'd all bring our vinyl along. It was still vinyl and real music. And I've still got records back at home, which we used to play and put on the turntables, which have still got oat flakes stuck to them.
Cereal giant Weetabix was also aiming for the top. Heir to the family business, Sir Richard George was determined to seize a chunk of this emerging market.
The idea for Alpen actually came because one of our directors, marketing director, had a Swiss au pair girl. And the au pair girl would mix up the fruit and nuts and grain and so on for his children as a breakfast food. He saw this, saw the children liked it, and took that into the office, took it into the lab and said to the chief chemist, can you make this up into a product for us?
It was an immediate success with shoppers and proof that big business was versatile enough to exploit the latest craze. Weetabix had taken a niche product and introduced it to the mainstream. As British tastes diversified, the food corporations launched new brands that appealed to small but profitable sectors of the market.
Alpen itself, I think, was launched absolutely at the right time in the right place. And timing is everything. What it did was to open up a completely new type of ready-to-eat cereal.
As culinary and health fads have come and gone, they've been able to re-engineer this product to stay hot. Cereal makers have always stayed one step ahead of the health fads, health authorities, and managed to constantly update their product.
In this environment, food companies had to be nimble to exploit our growing obsession with diet.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Having sat out the muesli revolution, the next big fad gave industry Goliath Kellogg's the perfect opportunity to catch up. The roughage missing from much processed food was becoming a worry for many. 1982, and out of nowhere, fibre was about to become the next big thing.
Based on eating fibre, like bran, it became the biggest-selling diet book in British publishing.
2 million copies have been sold so far. It's the fastest-selling penguin book ever.
Bran and fibre really took off in a huge way over the space of a very few years, with the publication of the F-Plan diet, a hugely successful diet book which advocated eating an extremely high-fibre diet.
So everybody suddenly went fibre mad. And bran is boring. I mean, bran is the outer crust of the wheat. So when you've taken all the nice white bits out and made it into flour, you get left with bran. And bran usually is used for cattle feed and things like that.
The issue for Kellogg and for the advertising was that as soon as you mentioned bran, the consumer reaction was, well, that really doesn't taste very nice. In fact, it probably is pretty disgusting.
We were doing a lot of branding of all bran and bran flakes in women's magazines, particularly back panel promotions, which is another way that we bring the message to the consumer.
The genius of Kellogg's was to take a product associated with bowel movements and introduce it to polite society. It was responding to our growing desire for self-medication through food.
Kellogg's all brand. Good. What Kellogg recognized was that there was an opportunity to pick up on health trends which they'd observed, and they were very, very good at doing their research and understanding what was going on in the broader market. And the brief, very simply, was to take these products, as we put it, out of the medicine cabinet and onto the breakfast table.
To get the public to buy bran, even if it was packed with sugar and salt, required a tour de force from the ad men. They didn't disappoint. Kellogg's dumped a jingle-shaped bomb on the heads of an unsuspecting British public.
The advert that I sort of tend to remember the most is the bran flake advert. You know, the tasty, very, very tasty. They're very tasty, just because it's sort of light and slightly humorous.
I just remember everyone saying, look, just remember, you've got to get across this taste message. You've got to make it very, very clear that these actually taste really good, surprisingly good. You know, advertising isn't a science. It's a bit of art, a bit of magic, a bit of alchemy that all came together to work.
Sales of bran flakes leapt 41% in a year. The food corporations had survived the processing debate and shown adaptability by exploiting the new health market. But a new threat to the big brands was emerging. The UK's shopping habits had been going through a revolution. It was the age of the supermarket. By 1980, for the first time, we bought most of our foods in big chains and not local stores.
During the 1960s, our business tripled in size, and it more than doubled again during the 1970s.
The supermarkets were able to use the huge revenues their increased customer base gave them to launch their own products. Own label represented value for money for shoppers, but threatened the supremacy of the mainstream brands.
The years where own label really grew, Sainsbury's brand came to the fore, were during the 1960s and early 1970s. By the mid-1970s, around half of what we were selling was Sainsbury's brand.
The first product we introduced, I think, was cornflakes, followed by a sequence of other slightly less popular lines, but which amounted to quite considerable volume in total.
The role of own label is a particular part of the competition in the UK marketplace. It's not unique. There is own label elsewhere in the world, but nowhere is own label such a big part of the mix. And I would argue, therefore, that nowhere does the consumer get a better deal, because the big branded companies are kept on their toes in the UK in a way that they're not anywhere else in the world.
I think the first thing that Kellogg recognised was that this was a huge threat. They absolutely spotted that supermarkets were building their own brands and building their own reputation.
We thought they were sort of parasites because they were copying our products and riding, if you like, on the back of our advertising.
For the manufacturers behind the well-established brands, there were two possible responses: accept it or fight.
I felt it was incredibly important that we actually got into manufacture of own label ourselves, because the only way that that business could go was up. And if it was going to go up, then we needed to have a part of it. And as long as we didn't have a part of it, it was just cutting into our market, our share, our profit. And I just felt it was vital that we got into own label as soon as we possibly could. Within the business, that was not a very popular move. My father particularly felt that we should not be in own label. It was felt sort of somewhat of a sacrilege to start producing for the own label, when own label was our biggest enemy at the time.
But arch rivals Kellogg's chose not to touch own label.
We felt it was extremely important that we differentiated our products as much as possible from the own label brands. So we were sort of passionate about keeping a gap between our quality and their quality.
A kilo of Kellogg's cornflakes costs around £3 in the supermarket. A kilo of own brands costs around £2.
We were drawing our customers' attention to the fact that Sainsbury's own label was the same quality as the big brands, but much cheaper, at least 20% cheaper, because we don't have those extra costs of advertising and marketing, and we're able to pass that benefit on to customers.
But when a consumer buys a Kellogg product, they know what they're getting. They know they're getting high-quality food. We have an amazing trust with consumers, so they know what they're getting. They don't always know what they're getting with private label.
On matters of taste, the difference between own label and branded was harder to quantify, even for one of the people who made them.
There was never really much difference in the taste between the two, so I don't think the consumer would necessarily notice. And it certainly didn't worry me. that they weren't. It wasn't something that was going to be detrimental to the sector as a whole. They were very well made, and basically very similar ingredients. So no, it was never really a problem.